Red shift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Women have become less strong over the last, I don't know, few hundred years. They used to have to do a lot of physical work, but they're so weak now that they cannot. And that's not just that they don't work out, it's that they've been bred to be weaker. You know, like the women in the past were much stronger. They had thicker bones, they were bigger, you know what I mean? But now women are weaker. You know, they're skinnier, they're frailer, they have thin, weak little bones, you know, but they have the genes of cunning of the elites, right, which takes over for their physical weakness. But the elites have bred a lot more than regular men over history, so this means that the doll-like women that did not have to have any strength, and they were the most beautiful, who were the brides of the elites, those women bred the most. And then the elites' kids had those genes that make, or maybe those women didn't breed the most, but they had, you know, some kids, and then some of those kids were male. And those men carry the genes for their female daughters being like their mother. That is beautiful but cunning, but, you know, weak. Because she's beautiful, but she's thin and weak, right? Those skinny little bones and stuff, right? So those you know, princes and aristocrats would go out there and breed like crazy with all the middle-class women, and all those middle-class women would have kids by princes or aristocrats' sons who had half their genes from a thin, physically incapable, but beautiful woman. From a man whose mother was that way, so therefore their daughters will be like that as well. So those beautiful women have, you know, granddaughters that are, you know, illegitimate, but are much more like her, right? They're beautiful, but they're weak and skinny and stuff, right? So then those middle-class women who bred with high-status men, maybe against their will, maybe they were raped, would have daughters that would be more like the biological father's mother, like I said. You know, physically thin and therefore fragile and weak, but beautiful and also cunning, because they get the genes for cunning from their biological father's father and his ancestors. So as elite men did not need strong women because they had a lot of money, and because elite men passed on their genes more, women became more and more fragile, more and more beautiful, and more cunning. Right? And the sons of those elite men might be killed off because they were illegitimate and had the genes of immorality or amorality, and thus did not conform to society, and so the society, full of moral 99% guys, would kill those guys who had, you know, elite fathers, because those guys would be amoral or immoral, and those guys would commit crimes, and then they'd be killed for those crimes. So women became more immoral over time, and men did not. Because the women were clever or, you know, there's a gynocentric preference to protect women. So the women would be more immoral each generation, but the men would continue to be moral because all the immoral men would be killed off by the rest of the men, right? So, you know, women became more immoral over time, became less virtuous over time, and men did not. Men stayed virtuous. Although I'm sure that most of it came from earlier times in evolution, where women were under more evolutionary pressure to survive because of being weaker than men and being the reproductive bottleneck, although back then, hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago, women were not nearly as weak as they are now. So maybe a lot of the cunning came from back then, or the deceptiveness and whatnot, but even then, a lot of that came from, you know, it was the elite women who were formed that way from way back, right? But the regular men were not. So then those genes just spread into the populace among women, but not among men, right? That is the genes for beauty and cunning and stuff like that. So women have gotten more and more beautiful, but frailer and frailer, thinner, shorter, narrower bones, etc., but also more cunning. And so now, at this point, women have become so beautiful and cunning, the men no longer appreciate the danger the women pose. Not just to men, but to society as a whole, because they're so pretty, they're so weak, how could they be any danger, right? So now the dolls are running the dollhouse, you know what I mean? And they're the kind of kids who are like that kid in Toy Story. You know, the one who's like deranged and he's twisting the dolls' heads off and blowing up the other toys and stuff. Like, this is what women are doing to civilization. So yeah, the dolls are running the dollhouse now. And humanity is suffering greatly because of it. Although it is men who are fucking up by refusing to hold women accountable. It is men who are letting all this gynocentric destruction happen. Because men are way stronger than women. Men could stop it at any time. But they don't. Men just have to get some balls and overthrow the government and or start spanking their girlfriends and you know, smacking any women who say that they're pro-feminism and all the rest of it. I mean, how hard would it be for, you know, 80 or 90% of men to start doing this? If 80 to 90% of men started doing this, there'd be nothing the government or the corporations or women could do about it. Absolutely nothing. So really it's men who are fucking up by letting all this happen. Right? Men are not inherently evil the way the women are. So actually, it's men who are more to blame than women, because men are going against their nature, right? Women are not going against their nature, really, by being hypergamous, by being deceptive, by being, taking advantage of everything they can, by being irresponsible, by being self-destructive. This is all in female nature. So they're still following their nature for the most part. But men are not following their nature. Men are being cowardly. Men are being immoral. Men are being hedonistic. So it's actually men who are screwing up worse than women are, even though women are more destructive. But the destructiveness of men of today is reflected in the destructiveness of women, because women would not be being destructive without men allowing them to be, right? And not allowing them to be, like giving them permission, like we're saying it's okay for you to be that way. When I say that men are allowing women to be this way, I'm saying that men are just failing to stop women from being that way, and are therefore de facto, they're automatically therefore giving women nonverbal permission to act however they want, because men are letting women get away with it. You see, women read nonverbal cues. If men say this is unacceptable behavior, but men continue to tolerate it and do nothing to punish women for doing it, women will just keep on doing it. It's only when you say this is unacceptable and there will be a punishment for it if you keep doing it, only then will the behavior stop. You see? So men are screwing up worse than women, I would say. And another thing I want to say in this video is that perhaps one of the reasons that some men are more attracted to less objectively attractive women, that is women who don't wear makeup, women who have a more plain face even without makeup. Like if all women didn't wear makeup, some women would be still stunningly beautiful and other women would be pretty but in a boring kind of way, right? And these kind of girls, these pretty in a boring, unextraordinary kind of way, these girls are less full of themselves, right? And even if they have a lot of beauty, such girls are not showy and are not overconfident. And this would seem to indicate that she would be a more humble, more faithful person, right? And a girl who's more faithful is going to be the kind of girl who can pass on the man's genes with more than he would be able to pass his genes on more with such a girl than with another girl who's more overtly beautiful, more overtly, is more hypergamous, is more extroverted, etc. Because a more extroverted girl who's more overtly beautiful and is therefore considered to be beautiful by more men, she is more likely to cheat and or more likely to leave that guy, her husband, for a new guy, right? So this is yet another reason why some guys are attracted to more plain-looking girls, because she's more likely to be faithful. Therefore, he's more likely to have a stable, happy life with her and be able to have more kids with her without her leaving him, right? The evolutionary imperative is to pass on your genes as much as possible. Guys want to pass on their genes as much as possible as well. It's not just girls who want to pass on their genes as much as possible. Guys do too. This doesn't need to be conscious or intentional. It's often usually unconscious. So if a girl is boring or less overtly attractive, if she seems more faithful, more humble, then she's going to be more likely to stay with him. Therefore, he will get to pass on his genes more, because finding a new wife is not always easy, especially if he already has kids. And even if he got to keep the kids, which is how it used to be in the past, and she got no money in the divorce, it would still be the case that the new wife would not love his kids from his old marriage as much as she would love the kids that she would have with him. That would be, her biological kids. So she might mistreat the kids, which are not hers. The second wife might, right? And even if she did not mistreat them, she would still probably show a natural, unconscious bias toward her own biological kids, and would be nicer to them than to her stepkids, right? Even if she tried to be equally nice to all kids and was nice to everyone, she would still be nicer to her own kids, probably. Right? At least in most cases. So that's yet another reason why a man would want to pick a woman who's more plain-looking, more humble, more boring, etc. Because she's not going to leave him, and he won't have to find a new wife and then have that wife not treat his kids quite as good as she treats the new kids that she'll have with him. You see? So that's another reason why a man would want to pick a woman who would not leave him, even though he would face no danger from divorce in terms of losing the kids or his money, like it was in the past. Like, even if we make it so that there's no danger of losing your money or your kids from a divorce in the future, men will get married again, but there'll still be a lot of men who want to pick more boring, more plain-looking girls, because such a guy might be able to get a woman above his own sexual marketplace value or at his own sexual marketplace value. Maybe he's a 7.5, and he could get a 7.5 or maybe even an 8, a girl in looks, right? She's gorgeous, very charming, etc., very smart, but he knows she's going to be more trouble. He knows she could easily get a 9 or an 8.5 guy, and she might leave him. And he doesn't want to put his kids through that. He doesn't want to have kids with her and then go through the horror of a divorce. And just like, even though he's not going to lose anything in the divorce, he still knows it's very acrimonious and it's unpleasant and it's hard on the kids. And the stepmom won't be as good to his kids as he'd like her to be. And there'd be a bias, and then there'd be conflict in the family. The kids would resent the new kids because the new kids are treated better than they are because she's their biological mother, the stepmother, that is. You see, it would cause all kinds of problems. So it's still, even in the future, if the misandric laws are repealed, there's still going to be guys pursuing more boring women because of these reasons, right? There's still going to be the problem of stepmother not loving the kids as much as her own as she would have with him, right? There's still the problem of finding a new wife, in the first place, right? Like, even finding that second wife could be hard, right? It could be difficult or expensive, and it'd be even more difficult to accomplish because a woman would rather marry a guy without kids than marry a guy who already has kids from a previous marriage. So, maybe his first wife, if he's an 8 out of 10 guy, he might get an 8 out of 10 woman, but the second wife, he might only be able to get a 6 out of 10 woman because, all the 7 and 8 out of 10 women, they want to get, guys who are not married, were not married before and who don't have any kids. Maybe you'd only be able to get a 5 out of 10 wife, right? Whereas he's an 8 out of 10 guy because, the only women who are willing to be with a guy who already has kids are 5 out of 10 women, right? So that's another reason why he wants to go after more boring, less overtly attractive women because, they're less likely to divorce him. And, like I said, that's another reason why he would not want to go through a divorce and stuff, because finding another wife would be a pain in the ass, right? And she might have to be lower SMV than the one he was with. And there's still the problem of the heartbreak that would result if he chose the wrong woman and she cheated on him or left him. Even if he's the type to be able to completely eventually get over the heartbreak. Some people get hurt and they never get over it. Other people get hurt and they do get over it. So even if he's the type who can completely get over a heartbreak, it would still be painful for a while, at least a few months, if not a few years, probably likely a couple of years, if not more. And who wants to go through that, right? If you don't have to go through a big, painful heartbreak, the breakup, why would you want to put yourself through that if you don't have to? Why wouldn't you choose a girl who's less likely to cheat or divorce you in the future, right? So faithfulness and devotion were more important in the past and will be again in the future. And less extroverted and less overtly beautiful women were desirable to men because they had these advantages of not leaving and not causing the man all those problems. Not just because they're lower in SMV, but just because they're a more boring, shy, introverted type. So even if they were as high in SMV as another girl, they would still be less likely to cheat or leave the guy, right? Just because a guy can hook a girl, even get her to marry him, does not mean that she will be a good wife, and does not mean that she will not start to eventually think that she could have done better than him, and thus she will start treating him badly, will start wanting to cheat, will resent her husband, even if she doesn't cheat. Even if she doesn't cheat, it could still be a bad marriage because she thinks she could have done better than him, right? Men instinctively want women of their own SMV because men know that women are hypergamous deep down. Right, and if men deep down know that women are hypergamous, right? Even if it's only deep down, they're hypergamous, and men deep down know this, right, in their intuition. And he knows that if a woman is his same SMV or lower, she's less likely to cheat on him or leave him, especially if her SMV is lower. And if she has a better moral character from being beautiful in a more plain way as opposed to being beautiful in a more overtly obvious way, or if she acts more humble, then she's more likely to be faithful, and such a couple is more likely to have well-behaved kids, which is another important consideration. If you marry a woman who's gorgeous and smart and charming, but has a really bad temper and can often be a real hellish bitch, then you're not only going to have to deal with her, but you're going to have to deal with such bad behavior from the sons and daughters that you have with that woman. Your sons will be rebellious, and your daughters will be spoiled or willful, or might even start having premarital sex. And I'm talking about like in a couple hundred years in the past from now, or a couple hundred, or 100 years in the future, or 50 years in the future, whatever, after traditionalism has been brought back, premarital sex will be very forbidden and destructive still. It'll be recognized as being destructive. I mean, it's always been destructive, but it'll be recognized as being destructive. And so hardly anyone will do it. But if you have, children or the rebellious, short-tempered, entitled type of woman, your kids, your daughters might very well end up having premarital sex, right? and then they might get knocked up. But even if they don't, because of in the future, birth control being much more advanced, men having birth control also, etc. This would mean that even if she doesn't get pregnant, she's still lowering her own sexual marketplace value by having premarital sex in the future after neo-traditionalism has been reestablished, after traditionalism has been reestablished. And that would burden you financially and damage your reputation as a father and a man that your daughter had premarital sex. They'll be like, oh, he must be a weak man. He must be a shitty father, that he didn't teach his daughter strongly to avoid having premarital sex, that he didn't, lay down the law and say, I'm going to disown you if you have premarital sex. The very fact that she had premarital sex proves that he was a crappy father and that he's a weak man. Right, like it would ruin your reputation, and it would also, burden you financially because her SMV is lower now because of having premarital sex and everybody knowing it. And then, she has to live at home for longer because, women working will be unacceptable in the future. Nobody will let women work in the future. So, unless she's like really ugly and she can't get a man. So that's another reason why you don't want to be with a woman who's, has more of an attitude, is more overtly charming, more overtly beautiful, more entitled, and all the rest of it, because the kids will be hellish. And not only are there all those practical considerations, but there's an even bigger issue to consider. If a girl was extroverted and overtly beautiful, then it was a danger in the past, and even today, I guess to a little degree, and in the future, maybe, especially under anarcho-capitalism, this would be a big danger. Well, to a degree. Maybe not a bigger danger than it is today, but it would still be a danger, and maybe a bigger danger because you can more easily get away with it under anarcho-capitalism. That is, in the past, let's say just we're considering in the past, although this applies to the present and the future as well, but to a smaller degree. In the past, like if a girl was extroverted and overtly beautiful, then it was a danger to her husband, especially like thousands of years ago, because she might want to cheat, but she might be too scared to cheat. Right? Because all women look out for other women misbehaving. At least they did in the past, right? All women were, looking out their windows and seeing if any men that shouldn't be going in were going into any of the women's houses while their husbands were at work, So, if that went on, she would gossip, right? And then her husband would find out that, a man went into his wife's house and was there for a few hours, right? And then he would be like, are you cheating on me and stuff? Or he'd re-examine their kids and look at them and see if they actually look like him. And if they didn't look like him, he might leave because he'd be like, I don't think these kids are mine anymore because there was no DNA testing back then, right? So women did, police each other like that. And if women cheated, then other women would tell on them, basically by gossiping, and one of the women would tell her husband, and then the husband would tell his male friend, and then that male friend would tell the guy who's getting cheated on, right, by his wife. So a woman who wanted to cheat rather, might tell the guy who wanted to have sex with her, who she wants to cheat with, but has not yet cheated with, and is too scared to cheat with. She might tell that guy that she would like to marry him, but, she can't because, her husband. And then she'd be like, if only my husband were to drop dead, then I could marry you, And then the guy pursuing her might be like, well, all I have to do is get the husband out of the way, and now I can marry this girl, right? So then he kills the husband. He murders the husband, and so he can marry this woman, right? So by getting a woman who's overtly charming, overtly very attractive, etc., that could end up getting you killed, right? Because some other guy might kill you to be with her, and she might actually allow that. She might give the guy reasons to believe that if he kills you, all he has to do is kill you, and then he can get your wife for himself, right? Like, she might not even cheat on you. She just has to make it known that she will be with the guy if he kills her husband. And then he will do it, right? If she's really gorgeous and really charming. So you being with a very charming, very beautiful woman could actually get you killed in the past. So that's yet another reason, a big reason, why many men throughout history have preferred to marry women who are pretty in a very plain way, a boring way, and women who are also not only pretty in a plain, boring way, but are also humble, shy, quiet, introverted, and low in self-esteem. These girls are less likely to get their husband killed because they are less likely to pursue other men while married, and they're less likely to attract the attention of other men in the first place, thus making her being tempted to cheat or leave her husband much less likely because of her not being pursued by any other men in the first place. So it's an issue of the man physically surviving who he chooses to marry, right? Like, who he chooses to marry is actually an issue of life or death. Because if he chooses the wrong woman, very charismatic, beautiful, but ruthless woman, it could get him killed. And regarding a mousy, less charismatic woman being less likely to cheat, it's not just because he doesn't want to get his heart broken or have to divorce her and find a new wife. It's also because the more beautiful and charming she is, the more likely that she would cheat. Because even if he divorced her, she could easily find a new man because of her pulchritude. And because a more beautiful, more charismatic woman is more likely to cheat, this means that if he marries a more overtly gorgeous and charismatic woman, then she could cheat, and he might never find out about it. And then he could end up raising kids of other men, and no man wants to do that. So picking a shy, quiet, demure, low self-esteem, boring, plain-looking, although perhaps beautiful in a plain kind of way, picking a woman like that means that he's not only less likely to get killed, not only less likely to get cheated on, not only less likely to have hellish children, and all the other reasons that I mentioned, but he's also less likely to get cuckolded. That is, he's more likely to have kids that are actually his own. He's less likely to end up raising another man's children if he picks a boring, plain-looking woman, right? So that's another good thing about picking a boring, plain-looking woman, or beautiful in a plain-looking way type of woman, because he's not going to get tricked into raising another man's children. Now, it must be admitted that even these kind of women, these, shy, quiet, demure, low self-esteem, pretty in a boring kind of women, even pretty in a boring kind of way, even these women today cheat. But that's not so much of an issue of those women's nature as it is an issue of culture. Culture is so much about pushing women to be entitled, and it's so much about pushing unrealistic beauty standards, and this culture is so unappreciative of virtue that women who would have been highly faithful and highly moral if they had been born 100 years ago are now ashamed of how they are. That is, being moral and self-restrained and quiet and all the rest of it, right? Like, women in the past were, if not proud, then at least happy and content being quiet and shy and stuff like this, right? They're happy and fine being that way. But not women today. Women who are like that naturally these days, they're actually ashamed of being that way, right? And they get no advantage from being moral, from being virtuous. They get no respect from being virtuous. They get no admiration for being moral and virtuous. And they instead are encouraged to be ruthless, reckless, promiscuous, unfaithful, entitled, etc. And so these naturally virtuous, shy, low self-esteem, plain Jane kind of girls feel insecure and unhappy. And so they feel like they deserve or should deserve better than what they're able to get in the romance department, because high status guys, or even just, 6 or 7 out of 10 guys, no longer appreciate women with virtue. So a girl who in the past could have gotten a higher status guy because of her virtue, she can no longer get such a guy, because guys no longer appreciate women with virtue, just like most women these days no longer appreciate men with virtue. And thus these naturally good women are insecure and want to feel loved and appreciated and want to get a high status guy that society tells them that they deserve, but which they have zero luck in finding. And so when they're dating a 5 out of 10 guy, even though she's maybe a 6 out of 10 or a 7 out of 10, she then may become friends with a 7 out of 10 guy. And if the 7 out of 10 guy pursues her and kisses her one day, then she'll fall into it and end up sleeping with him. Whereas this plain Jane girl would never have done something like that if she had been born 100 or 150 years ago, because her virtue would have been appreciated and encouraged, instead of being unappreciated and discouraged. And therefore her identity would have been that of a virtuous woman, rather than her identity being that of a woman who's unappreciated and whose virtue is just an obstacle to her being happy, right? And she never would have been allowed to be friends with a male and spend time with him alone if she had been born in the 1900s or earlier, right? If she had been born in, 1910 or something, she would have been in her 20s in, the 1920s. And so it would have been the case that, like, she never would have been able to be friends with a male, and so she never would have ended up cheating, right? And she would have greatly diminished her reputation in the past if she had cheated, and that would be another thing that would have prevented her from cheating. And whereas today, women cheat, and it's like no big deal. It doesn't even ruin their reputation, right? Because people are so shameless these days that there's almost no such thing as a reputation when it comes to sex and cheating and all the rest of it, right? All that matters is money and charm and things like this, and looks. Such a girl today can cheat, and it's no big deal to anyone but her and her boyfriend, who got cheated on, right? And maybe her parents will be upset if they're religious or something. So the fact that even these mousy plain Jane types cheat today is not a rebuttal of anything that I've said in this video. Because in a sane culture, such as the culture we had 150 years ago, or even 100 years ago, such mousy women were the type of women who gave a great advantage to the men who married these women, as opposed to the women who were more charming and more overtly beautiful and more extroverted, who were more of a pain, more likely to cheat, more likely to, get pregnant and tell their man that it's his even though it's not, etc. right? Just because plain Jane boring women no longer provide a benefit to men today does not mean that those women, these boring plain Jane women, did not provide a great benefit, a great advantage to men of the past. These women did provide a huge benefit to men in the past, great advantages to choosing them over higher status women, and these women will again provide a great benefit to men in the future if men have the balls to overthrow the government by any and all means necessary, and if men have the wisdom and compassion to reestablish a traditionalist society based on morality, monogamy, sound money, and on the freedom and natural consequences that arise from people's behavior under anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism is the most traditionalist, the most feminist, the most free for racial and sexual minorities. That is, racial and sexual minorities don't have to worry about, being granted freedom by the government. Under anarcho-capitalism, they have absolute freedom, just like everyone does. Anarcho-capitalism is the least gynocentric, it's the most prosperous, it's the most responsible and moral societal setup that can exist. Although calling it a setup is a bit misleading, because it's just everyone having absolute freedom, infinite rights. This has been Redshift, Peace Trucks for Politicians.